Hey everyone, I'm Peter Askim, and I'm a composer and conductor and the artistic director of the next Festival of Emerging Artists. And I'm so happy to have you all here today. We're doing a focus on social justice and activism this week at the festival. We had amazing workshops on Tuesday and a panel with some alums who started some incredible organizations. And one of the things that we wanted to do this year was to empower our fellows and our audience who are interested in making the world a better place through their art by giving you access to the Center for Artistic Activism. And Steve Lambert and Rebecca Bray and KT are joining us today, and they're going to talk to you about how to be effective in your arts activism, best practices, and ways to really make a difference. So let's hand it over to them. I'm really happy to have you all here and want to get started and jump right in.
Great, sounds good.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, so before we introduce ourselves, I think maybe we'd like to have you introduce yourself. And if you don't mind, just write your name in the chat and what kind of work you do. And I think let's add like how are you incorporating activism so far? Or are you new to it? Is it something that you've been trying? What have you been doing? And while you do that, we'll introduce ourselves. Rebecca, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Rebecca Bray. I'm one of the co-directors for the Center for Artistic Activism. And I've been an artist for a long time and came to the center about 4 years ago. Before that, I was working in the museum world, using experience design and art to teach people about science.
Great.
And yeah, Steve.
Sure, yeah. Or KT, why don't you go ahead and then I'll go.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is KT, and I'm talking to you from Dakar, Senegal, which is in West Africa. I'm a Senegalese hip hop artist, and I am the co-host of a show we will talk about later, called Journal Rapé. Doing it since 2013 with another Senegalese rapper, Human. I also do a lot of social work, but mainly in the field of education. That is one subject I'm really interested in, and where I work in a lot of projects, youth education particularly. And I'm happy to be here with you.
Yeah, we are happy to have you here too. This is like not this is a treat we don't always get to enjoy. Um,
Mhm.
I think Maggie, you don't realize I'm talking to you, Elizabeth, Jade, Becca. Would like you to introduce yourself. Tash, Taryn, Giancarlo. Write your names. Tell us what you're up to. And I am Steve Lambert, and I am the co-founder and along with Rebecca, the co-director of the Center for Artistic Activism. And the center was created because we are all practitioners. We do this work, and we wanted to make sure that the creative work that we were doing that was trying to have impact on power was having as much impact as possible. And so we did that through research. We did that through teaching and interviewing artists. And at this point, we've been in 18 something countries in the world and done dozens of workshops around the world where we've met people like KT and learned from them too. I'll say my background is as a visual artist, but I also have been a musician, like touring musician, played bass in multiple bands and stuff, and so I have that part of my work also. Um, what did I
Yeah.
miss, Rebecca?
No, I think that was good. And one thing I wanted to say is that what we're talking about, what we wanted to talk with you about today, we could look at the next slide. We have about an
Yes.
hour and a half together, and we want to talk about artistic activism. And one thing to note when we're talking about artistic activism is that we're thinking about activism as the noun there, and we're thinking about artistic as all of the creative ways that we can make activism and advocacy better, more impactful, more surprising, engaging, resonating with audiences and things like that. So what we want to talk to you about is all these things that we've been learning about how creativity and all of the skills that you have can be applied to activism, and some of the things that we've learned along the way. We'll also, I think we have like a minute to stretch. We always want to incorporate that. And we want to talk a little bit about utopia and moving from utopia to strategy. And then finally, we want to have a discussion. So thank you for putting some info in the chat about yourselves. That's really
Yeah.
helpful.
And I think it's also good to say that this discussion is not about judging the value of your art or someone else's art. It's just about how we can use our practices effectively and integrate them into our activism.
Yeah.
That's all it's about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have a little bit different approach, which you'll see that we really believe in the power of artists and activism and the combination and taking that as far as
Mm.
possible. So, but we'll get into that. We'll get into that. Um, do we want to do the stepping off the curb stuff, or should we
Yeah.
jump to
No, we do. But let's talk
yeah?
about
Okay.
stepping off the curb.
All right. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. One thing we realize is that people who usually come to events like this have this deep desire of making the world a better place. And because you could be out there doing whether reading a book in a park, meeting with friends, watching TV, but you're here with us. So that's to us, it means that you definitely want to make a change. But the question is, why? Why is that? How comes you particularly are thinking of definitely making a change? And the next question that comes with that is, can you identify a time when you had to start being active and try to make the world better? What prompted you? And you can write the answer in the chat. That will give us a better idea of your motivation, but also of your experience, so that we can carry on with this discussion. So please, what motivated you to be an activist, to try and do something? Can we have an answer in the chat, please?
Yeah, and while you're typing, Rebecca, can you give a quick example?
Well, for me, I know um, when I was 5, I have two moms. My moms are lesbians, and when I was 5, they sat me down and said, "Listen, don't tell anyone outside the house that don't use the word lesbian and don't really talk about our family." And I just remember feeling like that is messed up. Like that's so wrong and unfair that we can't talk about our family and like we have to do something about that, you know? And so I think that's the first time I remember feeling a sense of injustice, I guess, and a feeling of like motivation to want to do something to change it. How
Yeah, and
about you,
so
Steve?
well, I was just going to say we call that like the
Yeah.
stepping off the curb moment because in activist lingo, it's like when you leave the curb and enter the march on the sidewalk, like it's the moment when you begin.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, I was going to art school, and like I had a sort of like unusual family. My mom was a nun and my dad was a monk, and they had like this sort of righteous side, but then they gave up on religion and just were righteous. um,
Mm,
anyway, but when I was in art school, I was fighting at the beginning and at the end, fighting two different illegal evictions in San Francisco. So as a tenant, right? So I was like going up against like these big landlord attorneys and stuff. And then I would go, and that was all really high stakes and real. And then I would go to art school and it felt like just really disconnected. And so I was trying to figure out like, okay, I need to figure out ways of defending my home and get involved in gentrification, but I want to be able to do that in a creative way.
mm. And Katie, how about you?
Mine is more related to my mom and the fact that at 6, she had a divorce with my dad, but couldn't keep me with her. And
Mm,
so she sent me away to my uncle's, far away from her. And then I started asking myself a lot of questions because I was always seeing her struggling to provide for me and my brother. But being a woman in a very patriarchal society, I could really see how she was struggling. And I felt a sense of injustice. How comes that, man had it all good, and my mom, who's a good
Mm,
person, is struggling. She couldn't get a job.
Mm,
Even to get somewhere, a place to live was difficult for her. So she just rented one room for her, me, and my brother. Um,
mm,
uh, and then later she sent us to my uncles, and I had that deep feeling of something not being right. And I guess
right,
that's where this whole thing is coming from.
right. That makes sense. Um, so are you guys typing? We're looking for stuff
Uh,
in the chat here. Um, let's see.
So, well, what
there's
I have a question then. So maybe people could just tell us by raising your hand, like doing little hand raise thing. Um, ha did any of you have a moment of when you decided to get interested in activism? And I know some of you actually said in the chat that you're really new to activism, but for many it was you've had some activism in your life. And did that happen because you signed a petition? Maybe raise your hand if there was a petition that kind of made it happen. I don't see any hands raised.
I see one coming in from Tash and Terrence. I'm going to read those, and
Oh,
we'll see
great.
if one of them says
mm,
sign a
mm,
petition.
Okay.
For me, it is because I'm an artist who is disabled, and this meant during school I missed a lot of classes. I had to start advocating for myself in education spaces and medical spaces to prove that I was sick, and as I was at the time. Sorry, to prove that I was sick as I was at the time and that I could continue to complete all my schoolwork. It taught me how to advocate for
Mm,
myself, gave me a drive to advocate for others.
mm,
That's great.
mhm,
Another person says, during college, more knowledge of injustice and art should serve a cause that's bigger than any pursuit of beauty or personal gain. So that sounds like a deep internal thing.
mm,
When I was 8, I read a book about environmental issues, and then I wanted to save the
mm,
rainforests to reduce climate change.
Great.
mm.
I'd love to know what that book is.
And I would
Yeah.
like to
It's a
know
powerful
how
book.
you came across the book.
Oh, yeah.
To me, seeing injustice in the world has made me feel like I can't just sit on the sidelines anymore.
Mm.
Oh, you guys were typing. Now they're flooding in. I realized I have to do something about activism when I realized while working for my college's art department as their social media manager that the department didn't want to say anything about Black Lives Matter. The thing they posted
Mm,
was very broad and didn't do justice for the movement or George Floyd. I realized that moment I needed to do something in everything I'm involved in personally.
mm,
And here's another one. I recently looked at the Grove Oxford Music online and saw that there were mostly only dead white composers represented. The website prides itself on being the leading music encyclopedia, but there's so much missing. It just feels so wrong.
yeah.
So these are good.
Yeah.
Let's look at our
Good.
list. And nobody described receiving a pamphlet. The
Mm.
book, the kid's book, but that's kind of different.
Yeah.
It's different than a
Mhm.
pamphlet, though. Yeah.
Reading a white paper is like a technical report. That's not quite a children's book about the environment.
I don't know if it was a children's book, but
Well, did they say, I think they said they were
they were
8,
8.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it could have been
Published.
a advanced
Yeah.
reader.
Yeah.
Who knows? Watching a press conference. Nobody said watching a press conference.
I don't think so. Oh, sweet. India, this is in your elementary school library, the book was. That's
Oh,
cool.
you just came
Yeah.
across it. That's cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So reading a news story. Some of you talked about seeing, some of the things that went on this summer.
Oh, wait, Harry had a hand raised.
Harry, he said,
Reading a
seeing
news
injustice
story?
in the world made me feel like I just can't sit on the sidelines anymore. So that did come through the news. So, all
Mm,
right, we got one.
mm.
Um, we had watching a PSA,
Like, what is a PSA, Steve?
public service announcement. They usually run pretty late at night now. But Going to a lecture. Anyone have that? I don't think I saw that. Attending a meeting, like a political meeting. No. Forward of an email, retweeting a tweet. Well, so what's funny is all the things that you described, just going back here. Well, our first one was like the lived experience of having health issues, right?
Hmm.
And realizing you need to advocate for yourself. That's like a lived experience. That's a felt thing. Um, some of you too described, let's see, more
Becca,
knowledge of injustice made me think that art should serve. So it's like, I see that as like a personal kind of thing of like, all right, I'm making art that maybe has been around beauty or personal gain, but I need to be doing something else. And it's like a personal
mm.
reflection. But what were you going to say, Rebecca?
Well, Becca just wrote in that activism and helping the community was a value instilled in her at a very young age. So there
Yeah,
wasn't a concrete moment, right?
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Hmm.
So, and even Harry, you said you saw seeing injustice in the world has made me feel like I just can't sit on the sidelines anymore. That did come through the news, but again, it's where you described, you even used the word feel, right? And there's this huge disconnect between the way that what political campaigns consider successful. So if you look at that list, if you are a political organizer, that list is like a
Or
gold
even a
mine.
lot of NGOs spend a lot of their money and time on that things on that list.
Yeah. But that's not why you all are motivated. None of those things
Mhm.
really are what it's about. It's about lived experience. It's about feelings. It's about emotions. It's about, the way that you live, the how you were raised, even. So we've got these things. And some people that we've talked about say I was born off the curb, and I would say that Becca, that's sort of what you described. So KT, what are, tell me about this disconnect.
Yeah, I mean, we usually um, don't realize it because NGOs, governments are always out there printing posters, distributing pamphlets, having press conferences. Um, but, and the answers, as you say, the answers we just got in the chat are proving the contrary, that people are moved by very personal experiences. And all of us, me, you, Rebecca, as artists, the stories we told in the beginning also are very personal stories. And I think that is very important if we link it to artistic activism, um, in terms of motivation, but also in terms of what we should be looking for when we're out there doing things, having actions, and trying to convince people. That should give us a clue what we should count on.
Yeah, and I think it's lends to the power of the arts, right? So the
Exactly.
arts is what kind of moves people. A really amazing art, like think of your favorite artwork and like how do you describe why it's so great? It's hard because it's like it's just this thing that you feel. And as artists, we can do that, right? That there's tremendous power there. And we can provide like a not the same experience, but a window into that experience. And because that's what motivates all of us, like this is a key part of successful activism that often is overlooked, like the role of the arts and the importance of the arts. And that's why we
Hmm.
talk about artistic activism.
Yeah. And we actually next want to show you some examples from all over the world of activism that's done really creatively. And we want to show these to you because we think that they demonstrate some principles of creative and effective activism that you can take and you can use in your own work. Now, but one thing about this is that these are not comprehensive. There's such a huge world of artistic activism out there. We can share some resources with you because we know it can be nice to look at lots of different examples to get inspired. So at the end, we'll share some more so that you can keep looking. But we just are going to offer a little curated collection for you here. A couple of things about them. These particular ones won't work for you. And the reason why is because the context matters so much. The particular culture, the particular audience matters. But we're offering them to you because we all know as artists that creativity comes from the mashups, right? It comes from taking some little nugget of an idea from something you saw here and something you saw there and combining it with something inside you. And so we want to just offer some more of those nuggets of inspiration. Katie, will you tell us about Journal Rapé?
Yeah, Journal Rapé. So before I dive into Journal Rapé, I would say the two hosts of Journal Rapé, Human and me, before starting Journal Rapé, we had our personal careers as rappers. Human still does, me a lot less, but Human is still out there. He's an artist, he's releasing songs, releasing albums. I am not. But since 2013, we both are working on Journal Rapé. And the very first week we started Journal Rapé, a mobile operator came and wanted to buy the program. But we had a discussion and we were like, no, that's not the plan. Because the mobile operator wanted to put it on a pay-per-view platform where it's not accessible unless you're paying. And we said, no, we're putting it for free on YouTube because of the very purpose why we are making this show. So Journal Rapé basically was born it was created in the context of the presidential elections of 2012 in Senegal, where the Senegalese youth have played a very decisive role because they registered and went to vote so they could change government. And because there was this huge interest into everything politics, which was really kind of surprising to everybody because usually Senegalese youth, yeah, they all think the same. Politicians are liars, they're stealing our money, they're not interested into improving our conditions. So we're not interested into anything the government says. We're not interested into politics. We're not interested into our role as citizens. And the hip hop movement in Senegal was convinced of the contrary. Rappers were convinced of the contrary, that we should talk about politics, especially young people should get invested and interested into politics. So to keep that momentum we had in 2012, we created Journal Rapé as one way to get young people interested into politics. Basically, we present the news every Friday. It's on YouTube. And we present the news, what's been going on during the week, but it's satire. We laugh of what decisions that were taken by the government. We give the politicians some funny names. And yeah, since 2013, it's been really successful here. But to give you an idea, I'm just gonna let Steve play you just a little bit of Journal Rapé so you can really see how we're combining the need to get young people into politics and art.
Okay, here we go.
C'est qui garde mon cœur, on dit que puisque la femme africaine est forte, elle doit tout supporter, infidélité, insulte et trahison, diverses humiliations, des coups et des bastons, tout en restant soumise et surtout garder le sourire.
Pas encore développé, l'Afrique est déjà polluée et c'est dans la mauvaise direction qu'on est en train d'évoluer. La fumée noire recrachée en continu par les usines et les pots d'échappement des voitures envoient un très mauvais signe. Essence frelatée, gasoil de mauvaise qualité se retrouve dans la circulation en très grande quantité, sans parler du charbon et des tonnes de de bois qui sont découpés. 2 millions d'hectares de forêts disparaissent ainsi chaque année. Le pillage des exploitants forestiers industriels devient sur le court terme un danger réel.
Don't just complain, listen up, we got suggestions. The solution for us is good governance, investment, focus on job creation, encourage innovation. The next Steve Jobs in Congo, making bots out of tin cans. Youth inclusion is key in defining policy change.
Ali boy ak di fay Afrique centrale 200 millions d'hectares loxo nit a koy taal. Mbënd yi Angola, Mozambique, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Madagascar ci tawi daaw yi. Sahel nawet ak noor léegi ñoo yem xamatuñu kañ la taw di ñëw kañ lay dem. Désert bi di gën yaatu nit ñi xiif jur gi dee waa kaw ga daw àll yi wuti dëkku taax. Surpopulation ñàkk chômage fa lay dikkee pollution dëkki Afrique amatuñu air bu baax. Mbalit mi lu ci pexe mi ngi fépp ci mbedd mi la ñi sànni lépp.
Yeah, so that's basically what Journal Rapé is about. That's what it looks like. And it's been very successful since the beginning. And I think literally the 3 first months after we started it, it was covered by all big news outlets around the world. But still, we over the years, we did everything we could to keep it the way it is, the purpose, and make it according to the principles we had started making it, because that part is very important. The principles of Journal Rapé are really clear to us. And the first one is that Journal Rapé is informative. It can't be just for fun, for making fun of people, but it got to be informative. When Parliament votes a new law, we're talking about it and we explain what the law is, what it is about, what are the implications of the law. The other principle is that it's satire. It got to be satirical, because we believe in the power of humor to address certain issues, especially those who are sensitive, especially in a country where we could have religious divisions or political divisions or ethnic division. It is important to approach things with humor so we can discuss about things. The next principle is that Journal Rapé has to be inclusive in terms of gender first, because the condition of women in Senegal, in Africa in general, we still have progress to make when it comes to those things. Inclusive also in terms of the languages we use, inclusive in terms of we're not only talking about Dakar, which is our capital city where everything happens, but we also talk about what happens inside the country, and also invite artists from inside the country so they can represent their regions. The next principle, which is a big one to us, is that you can do Journal Rapé with a minimum equipment. Just a quick example. One artist who lives inside Senegal wanted to do basically the same things, but he called us explaining that he didn't have equipment. And we're like, what do you mean you don't have equipment? You've got your phone, you've got your smartphone. You can record yourself with your smartphone, basically. And he started like that. He started with playing an instrumental, recording himself with his mobile phone and putting it on Instagram. And after a year, he had built a following and had found ways to have good equipment. So now his show is well made, it's well filmed, well edited, and it's on YouTube where he has his own following. The next principle is that Journal Rapé is audience-driven. Audience-driven because the context we are in is that of a country with 60% young people. Senegalese population is 60% young. And that's really huge. because that comes with demands of education, healthcare, employment, and those demands are not always met by the government. So there is frustration, there's anger, and the population actually keeps growing really fast. For example, in 1980, Senegalese population was 5.5 million. In 2020, the population is 16 million. So it's growing really fast, and those demands are growing with the population. So we have to find a way to build with the youth differently. But that goes from pressuring the government to also telling the youth there are things you can do by yourself. And one major cause of unemployment is illegal immigration. I guess you've all seen images of Africans or West Africans taking the boats, trying to cross the ocean and get to Spain. Most of them are coming from Senegal, because Senegal is a sort of hub for those who want to join Europe. They're coming from Burkina Faso, they're coming from Mali, Togo, Nigeria, because Senegal is really close, and they depart from here. And unfortunately, every year there are hundreds and hundreds of young people mainly dying in the ocean. And for example, between October and November 2020, 12,000 migrants arrived in the Canary Islands in Spain. And out of those 12,000, in November alone, between 180 and 240 young people perished in the ocean. So that gives you an idea of the loss over a year, because this happened just between 1 month. So that's one of the reasons why Journal Rapé is targeting the youth also. And in such a context, one of the few ways young people have to be heard by the government or authorities or adults is rioting. So very often there are riots, some minor, some major. Minor, just a quick example, 2 days ago, the secondary house of the president of Senegal, which is in the north of Senegal, was burnt by young people who were unhappy. And just because the president was having a visit there, coming with this huge delegation with 4-4s, and spending a lot of money for his rallies, and young people were mad. Like, why don't you invest this money in the youth? Because we don't get a job, we don't go to school, and you're coming here just because you want to get reelected, you're investing all of this money. So they got mad and burned the house. In last March, there were huge demonstrations in Senegal, and in between a week, 14 people were killed, 14 young people, and the eldest was 24 years old. So that gives you an idea of the age of the rest of the victims. And 500 young people were also arrested. So in such a context, we thought that it makes sense to use hip hop to talk to young people, to use hip hop and try to set a discussion about the condition of young people, how they can contribute to Senegalese society. Because hip hop is very old in Senegal, which is surprising to a lot of people. Hip hop has been here for 30 years. I'm rapping since 1988. So yeah, it's been here since a long time, and it's really strong. It goes from being the first genre of music to sometimes being the second when other genres are pushing. But for example, right now, And since 2 years, like the main artists everyone is talking about are hip hop artists, because they've been producing really good content. So hip hop is really strong here. And it was the hip hop movement during the elections of 2012 who came with this motivation to make young people interested into politics. And Journal Rappé was the informative part of that movement. Other rappers did other things with maybe recording songs. We decided to do Journal Rappé. The next big principle, which is very, very important to Journal Rappé, there is no licensing. We didn't want any licensing around the idea of Journal Rappé. We were convinced that people who were in other parts of Africa, other parts of the world, and who wanted to reproduce it should have access to how it's made, should have access to us so we can explain, share our experience so they can do it. So it's open source. And in some countries, we could find funds to travel there when some artists showed interest in having Journal Rappé in their country. We traveled there, trained them, and gave them the equipment to make their own Journal Rappé. With some countries, we had direct collaborations. Other countries, they did it by themselves, but some of them contacted us. So we explained, okay, you do this, you do that, you have a graphic designer, there's someone who's collecting the news so that you guys are not overwhelmed. And at the end of the week, you can sit and choose what you want to talk about. And actually, after some years of existence, Journal Rappé was replicated in 10 other countries. And the first one being Madagascar with Clash Info. Then there is Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast, we collaborated directly with them, went there, spent a week, trained them, and helped them make their pilot episode, and gave them the equipment. There's also Jamaica with Listen Me News. They called us directly, asked us, how did you make this thing? We explained, they made a pilot, sent it to us. We answered like, okay, this and this is not working. You better change this or that. We like this. That's how we did it. So, and now they have their own show. Another country is Uganda. Uganda also replicated it with Newsbeat. And outside of Uganda, we have countries like Mauritania. We collaborated with them, went there, spent a week. Same process as Cote d'Ivoire. Also Mali, we brought them over to Senegal, trained them here, and gave them the equipment. Togo, Cameroon, same, brought them to Senegal, trained them, gave them the equipment. Vietnam and Guinea. So basically, this is what Journal Rappé is about. Now, more and more, the impact of this in Senegal is that there's a lot more artists coming out and trying to propose things, to do something that is different from albums they release, videos they release, because they know that this is for the community. And that's definitely the idea we wanted to share from the very beginning when we started doing Journal Rappé. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. It's, like I said, it's such an honor to have you here, because this project, the way that you've, like we were talking about, incorporating real activist goals and outcomes with a very artful delivery, and like the way that you think about audience, and then also not just the success of the project, but how it has spread to all these different places. It's really remarkable. So glad to have you here. So I'm just going to talk about this project that I did quickly. It's called Capitalism Works for Me, True or False, and it's a giant sign. This is about 9 feet tall and 20 feet wide. And when you come up to it, you can vote whether or not in your life capitalism is working for you. So there's this podium, and then you press true or false. And this is it installed in Times Square. So when I made this, it was about 10 years ago. And this was like before Bernie Sanders. This is before the rise in people joining the Democratic Socialists of America. This is before Occupy, right? So talking about capitalism in such an upfront way was, it actually felt a little dangerous when we started in Ohio, you know. But the idea was for not to tell people what to think, but to get them thinking about capitalism, to get them evaluating it in their own life. And they could vote true or they could vote false. But whenever they voted, the number changed, right? So like their voice counted. And I think this is another important principle, is like when we're thinking about how we incorporate people, how we build larger movements and engage people, that participation is meaningful. It's not a token participation, but that they get to say something and it actually makes a difference, even if it's small.
I also like, and you know, I don't think you say this, but like you get immediate feedback and it's sort of like a game in that way.
Yeah.
Like there's that nice thing of like, I press the button and the number changes. And
yeah, it's really
that
simple.
is satisfying.
we chose these buttons very carefully because like people, like they're like, I want to press it again. And you know, it's just like there's a certain satisfying button pressing.
Yeah.
But they know how voting works and they know how scorekeeping works, right? So they're like, that part makes sense. And then they're like, what do you mean capitalism? Like that's the part that's foreign. So when you're talking about something that's kind of foreign, it helps to have these familiar elements. So there's that meaningful participation part. This is also another piece that it's, you know, Times Square is a really big public space, and figuring out how it can hold its own, you know, there's size that you can do, but there were other things that we did to help engage people. Because what we really wanted was like, this person here is to, you know, kind of make their way towards the sign and engage the piece. Now, the thing is, if you went up to that person and said, hi, can I talk to you about capitalism? They're going to say no, right? Like, because engaging with you, it's like, that's a big risk. How long is it going to take? Are you going to talk to me about stuff I don't want to talk about? Are you going to try to convince me something that I can't be convinced of? Do you want money? Do you want me to sign something? Like, nope, don't want to do it, right? So we had to figure out how to engage people and bring them closer. So this is a shot from above, from a local nearby building. And you can see that there's this blue rug around the space. You can see it here. And when I first went to first meetings with the folks in Times Square, we were like talking about the logistics of how we were going to do this. And they're like, you do need a floor covering. And I was like, what? You know, and they're like a rug or like a mat. You need a mat. And I was like, why? You know, like, are you worried about me damaging the ground in Times Square? And they're like, no, it's because the space is so massive. You have to figure out how to take up that space. And so you can see in this picture, you know, it becomes its own sort of stage. And so this is another thing, is like thinking about taking up space, both physically, but also like how you have presence in public spaces or among audiences so that you can get that attention to communicate an idea. This was the larger space that we were working with, and I kind of call this the range of engagement. And if you look back here, there's somebody that's taking a picture, like she's holding up a phone, right? So that works too, right? Like her being way back there, taking a picture of it kind of works. She's reading it, she's going to look at it later. She's getting the message of it. Of course, there's more. And so what we would do is have a team of people that were kind of patrolling this area. This is in Australia. We've shown this piece in a lot of different places around the world. But, and they would just go up and explain what it was, right? Because again, if you ask someone, do you want to participate? They're going to say no. But if you just walk up to someone and say, hey, yeah, so that's this big sign and it says capitalism works for me. And then if you press a button at that podium right there, if you press true, that number changes. If you press false, the other number changes. And right now, true is at 87 and false is at 82. And then they're like, huh. And then, you can say like, do you want to, if you want, you could go up there. And they might, or they might not, but we were sort of ready to engage them at that level. And then at this sort of closer thing. So this is Beck. She was one of the volunteers. And we also use these A-frame signs to sort of explain what was happening. But the idea is like to bring the audience in closer, more slowly, get them understanding what's going on. We created a line on purpose. Like we didn't need to have a line. We could have just moved people through and press the button, but we wanted to slow them down and get them thinking. And we would deliberately slow down the line. And then you can see there's different people in this picture, but the guy in the polo shirt on the left, he's with us. And he's from a nonprofit that works on wealth inequality. And so he would just ask people questions, but he had a whole lot more knowledge than they would realize. And there are other people in the background, like that guy with the hat, the woman in black on the right. Those are all part of the team. And they would engage people in the line and ask them kind of questions to get them thinking more about it. And then what we found was like some people didn't really care about the pressing of the button, but they did want to talk about the ideas. So we had these ways of engaging people at multiple levels. This was after they pressed the button and they could do a longer interview about what they thought. So if they wanted to talk a lot, we had a place for that too. But the idea is that we're thinking of many levels of engagement, not just like a button press or looking at the piece, but like how do we bring the audience in and get them involved? So it's a lot more than just the object. And the other part about is that when people talk, I talked to literally thousands of people about capitalism. And if you ever do that, I don't recommend it, but you could, it gets boring, right? Because you hear similar stuff over time. And so it was really important to me that it was not ever boring, or it was always fun for the people that were on our team. And so I would tell them, like, keep it surprising, right? And like, keep it really real. Like if someone is telling you something and it sounds like they're reciting something they've said before, like interrupt them. And even just interrupting someone and like joking around with them. Like there was a guy that came up one time in a gray suit with a red tie, and it was a 3-piece suit. Oh, you guys will like this actually. And I was like, oh, I don't need to talk to you. I know what button you're going to press. Oh, and he had a cigar too. He was like gray 3-piece suit, red tie, and a cigar. I was like, I don't need to talk to you. And he was like, what do you mean? And I'm like, look at you. You're in a 3-piece suit with a cigar. Like, go ahead, press true. I know what you're going to do. And he was like, how do you know that? You don't know what I do. And I was like, okay, what do you do? Who are you? And that was my trick to get him to start talking to me, right? And also at a much more real level. And it turned out that he was the conductor of the Newark Symphony Orchestra. Ta-da! Okay, so that's that project. Is like keeping it surprising and keeping it real was a way of getting people to engage and think about the issue in a way that wasn't routine. And that's an important part of like bringing art into activism.
And actually, Steve, you could turn off the slides for a second, because I just wanted to take a moment out to say, like, if you're thinking, wait a second, I'm not an installation artist. Like, I'm not making a huge sign. How is this relevant to me? You know, all of this stuff. But we're going through these because no matter what your artistic medium is or the issue that you're working on, we're showing these principles because they are effective in activism. And so even if you're doing something totally different, like say you want to use music, you want to use music to like deal with health equity or something like that. Like you want to have concerts in underserved neighborhoods that draw attention to health equity, right? If you're doing that, you can still be creative to make that work more informative, like KT talked about, more inclusive, like how do you welcome people in, more audience driven or open source, have really meaningful participation, like Steve talked about, or many levels of engagement with the work that you're doing. Keep it really surprising, keep it really real. Like, you know, so these are all things, no matter the medium, no matter the issue, they can be relevant to what you're doing.
The other thing,
Rebecca,
go ahead.
I just wanted to add that one thing that really stood up to me was the principle of taking up space. Because, for example, your example was physically in a physical space. Ours with Journal Rapé is virtual, digital space. how do you take up space, you know, in a digital environment? So, and you come up with strategies, you know.
Yeah.
So just to confirm what Rebecca was saying, whatever your artistic action is, there are stuff you have to think about just to give your action more chance to touch people.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think I learned some of this stuff as a musician too, because I remember playing in bands and I'm sure some of you experienced this where it's like, all right, we have the set list, right? And then we would finish the song and then just stand around and it would be like, all right, should we start the next one? Like there were little conversations would start. It's like, you guys, we have to, like, there's got to be 3 songs with no break. So we just go right into the next one. And like, I was always thinking of the show, you know, and like how to put it together, like how we stood on stage, that we should enter the stage a certain way because it got people's attention in a different way. You know, if you just all sort of wander up on start tuning and then play, like people don't actually know, they don't take you as seriously, they don't know when you're beginning, you know. And it was like, I was always thinking about that kind of stuff. So anyway, do you want to jump ahead to Conflict Kitchen? I think the some of the other stuff we've covered. So
let's do it.
Here we go. All right.
So this was a project that happened in Pittsburgh, and it was a group of people who wanted to deal with the fact that most Americans didn't even know about the fact that the US was at war, in conflict with different countries in the world, right? And that they didn't know anything about these countries. It was something that felt really removed. And so that people weren't necessarily making informed decisions or talking to government officials about how they felt about these conflicts because they didn't really know what was going on or have a relationship to these places. So they created basically a restaurant, and they only served food from places that the US was in conflict with, currently in conflict with. So there's Cuba, Afghanistan, and you would go and get this absolutely delicious food from this place. Like it was really good, but it would come wrapped, and they would be in these wrappers that had first-person interviews with people who were either living in that region or immigrants from that region. And it was about their lived experience of that conflict. So they had that, which was like a really nice thing and a great like first level kind of activism, but they went really far beyond that as well. So they had people cooking this food, and they were learning how to cook the food from these regions from people actually in these regions. So they were interacting on Skype with, I think, a woman in Afghanistan who is teaching them how to make her grandmother's recipes. So you have this person-to-person interaction, and they're making food for these enormous dinners, which were also interactive conversations where it'd bring people from that region, have people who were actually there talk to people in the space, and really get into these areas of dialogue that people normally didn't, like kind of these tricky areas of like talking about conflict that we usually don't have an opportunity to dig into. But they attracted people with this really wonderful food and really created this entire kind of culture, like a local interest in participating in this. It was very, very successful, and there have been other copycats of this around the world, you know, looking at doing the same thing. Okay, so we wanted to talk about one more example and then kind of some of how we think about this more broadly about art and activism a little bit. And then we really would love to hear from you, your thoughts on all of this, any questions or ideas that come up for you, and especially around any work that you're doing and issues. But yeah, we'll go through one more example of something that we worked on for the past year or so. Free the vaccine. So a little over a year ago, we were, it was the beginning of the pandemic. And like all of us, we were like, oh my, what are we going to do here? What do we do to deal with this? And luckily we had been doing, with KT, we had been working on kind of online training with people for a while, and like training of trainers, and how do you help people collaborate to do creative activism. And so we thought, how do we can apply creative activism to the problems that we know are going to be coming around vaccine equity and health equity, right? And we're seeing all of that play out now in terms of access to vaccines and also to treatment and diagnostics of COVID-19, and how it has adversely affected many more underserved populations. And so we knew that that was coming. We've worked on public health issues before, and we thought, how do we do this? How do we use what we know about artistic activism and apply it to this problem, especially with people all stuck at home? So what we did is we put out a call to our networks, and 300 people responded immediately in March and said, yes, I want to do something. I'm stuck at home. Please let me help. And so we had artists, activists, we had nurses, we had people who were pharmacists, we had all kinds of people come together. And we put them into groups and we gave them missions, right, Steve?
Yeah, so they were like grouped by region or the different things that they would work on. And some of them were like trained performers, that had been worked for a long time. We had musicians. We had one of our best participants was like a drummer, still is a drummer. And they were bringing these other skills, and like merging them with people that like literally are pharmacists in Brazil, right? That's all they know. So they came up with all these different projects and then would develop them together. And part of the idea was that all the mediums were open, like you could do anything, but also that it was like an experiment, right? You make a small version, you try it out and you see what works.
Yeah, there's everything from performances to installations, posters. They would give people awards, like researchers who wanted to make their research open source. There's stop motion videos, games, tattoos, like all kinds of things were experimented with across all kinds of mediums.
Yeah, we created a global holiday for Jonas Salk, who was the inventor of the polio vaccine, and gave it away. And, this bottom right little logo, Lego Jonas Salk was made by an architect who had kids.
And actually, you might have seen one of the things we created was, the Dolly Parton song, Jolene. We made a version that was vaccine and made a video that lots of people saw. It went a little bit viral. And yeah, these are images that are taken at different in-person rallies that happened around the world. On the left is in London, and then there's New York as well.
Yeah, that's in front of the Pfizer offices. And this woman is like a performer in New York that's been around for decades, doing these kind of street performances, and she dressed up like a plague doctor. And then we had these sort of multiple very fun and surprising rallies in Washington. One that was in early May where we, other people activists that we worked with were like, if you guys need a bunch of body bags to represent the death on the mall, like we can bring a bunch of body bags. And we were like, no, actually, we think we're going to have Care Bears because we want to teach that sharing is caring. And if you're younger than the three of us, the Care Bears were like a kid's toy. And the slogan was caring is sharing. So yeah, and we were pushing for the release of the patents on these medicines so that they can be shared and produced in other countries, not just by the private corporations that we supported through our tax dollars to invent the medicines and now hold on to all the profit. So it's a huge ask. And the surprising thing is that it worked.
Yeah.
We had a lot of successes, including Biden supporting the release of those patents.
Yeah, and it worked on other levels too. There was this deep engagement ongoing for many, many, many months of people a lot of people who hadn't been activists previously, who were involved intimately for over a year and made a lot of really amazing work. So one thing that creative activism can do is it can prevent the kind of burnout that a lot of activists feel, because it was fun. There's an incredible community of people who are having a good time together.
There was also a lot of support that we got from people like this guy, and coalitions that were created, that because we were doing such visible work that was unlike what so much traditional activism looked like, because we were using creative methods and had artists involved in our campaigns, that they really saw us as taking the lead on helping the public understand these really complex medical and legal issues. And yeah, go ahead.
Right, the unprecedented policy change, it was, incredible. So as Steve mentioned, the day of the DC rally, Biden's administration took this step of supporting the IP waiver. And you can see the press that got. And the press really featured a lot of the images, because that's the creative activism can create some visuals that the press really can get behind. So that's useful. But some of the takeaways are also we had many, many people working together, but it doesn't mean that you have to in order for this kind of thing to work. We cultivated these small groups of people and really created environments so that they had a good time working together, and they had specific missions to do together, right? And so you can do that no matter how many people you have.
And theater people are usually better at working with others.
They're really good at collaboration, yes. Also the connecting with popular culture. So like the Care Bears and like Dolly Parton, when we do our workshops, we have lots of ways of helping people to think about the audience that they're trying to reach and really get deep into what are the stories and symbols that they love? What are the things that they do on the weekend on their own time, and why are they attracted to those things? Let's act like anthropologists and really dig into researching what is it that people really love. And Katie, you do this, I know, with your work, this kind of deep audience research, and that's critical.
It is very important. It's not only about what you want to share with the people, but it's also doing a little bit of research and try to understand, to know what people are interested in, what they like, and pass through that.
Yeah, totally. And another thing is, yes, surprise and weirdness can work. Being funny and surprising helps to keep people really engaged. Also, if you look at cognitive science, when do people start to pop out of their usual ruts of behavior or thought patterns? It's when they have a moment of surprise, right? And and art can do that. Art is really good at that, right? It's one of the superpowers that we can use. And you can, spread your messages through this kind of surprise and joy and weirdness, which can help it to spread. So just to go back again to this idea of artistic activism and what it is, it's so many things. Clearly, we've shared so many examples and so many ways of looking at it. But one thing to know is that, activism is usually thought of as something that has an outcome, right? So the common element of most activism is that it's an activity that is aimed towards an outcome, like changing a policy or overthrowing a dictator, or even organizing a group of people to have a dinner party. But the goal of the activism is to have an effect. Whereas art, of course, as you know, it doesn't have such a clear target, right? It's hard to say what art is for or against, of course, but its value lies in showing us new perspectives. Its goal is maybe to stimulate a feeling or to change us emotionally, to alter our perceptions, and it generates affect. And artistic activism is really affect and effect happening at the same time. And, you know, especially when that balance is good and you have both of those things operating, you can do some really powerful stuff like these examples that we've shown you. However, sometimes the balance is kind of off and you can lean more towards affect or more towards effect. And
Should I do this?
are you gonna do it? Oh yeah, Steve, go
Sure.
ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or KT, you want to take this one?
Maybe you can take it, but what I want to say before,
Yeah.
why we're having this example here. Me as an artist, I was doing songs before. Of course, I talked about politics before. I talked about youth before, but the approach I had was, okay, I'm writing a song. This is what I feel. So that's it. And the difference with Journal Rapé is there is a sort of organizing process behind Journal Rapé, and we try to stick to it because our objectives are clear, our goal is clear with Journal Rapé. And I think this example Steve is about to, is going to talk about will definitely show why it's important to make the difference between those two things.
Yeah, so when we talk about things that are more about like what's felt and being moved and getting that balance off, this is a famous artist named Richard Serra. He's a sculptor. He makes these big tilted arcs that are like out of steel. You might have seen them. And he's generally a pretty happy guy. He draws all the time. But after the Abu Ghraib prison scandal in Iraq, he was really mad. And this is about 10 or 15 years ago. And he made this drawing. And you can see, like, the drawing is about the torture of these prisoners. The figure is a famous photo from that was leaked out of this scandal. And you can see that he's mad because he's like just digging into the paper, you know, like so aggressive in a drawing style. But if you weren't sure, he literally wrote "Stop Bush" on the top, you know. And I think he's expressing his anger. He has a feeling about politics. He's making art about an issue. But if you asked him like, hey, do you think this will stop the Abu Ghraib torture scandal? Do you think this will prevent torture? He'd probably be like, no, you know. Is this going to change a policy? Is this going to change a law? No, right? If that happened, it would be coincidental, but he's first and foremost trying to just get these feelings out. And so we call this political expressionism. And it's good, it's important. Like, you know, we need artists to interpret those feelings and share them and help us reflect. But it has no attempt at any impact. And our belief is that, like, you know, when you want to, you can do a lot more. But let's go to the other side. And on the other side is effect. And
so
go ahead.
Yeah, well, this is just an example of a march where, you know, the Picasso painting Guernica, which is like one of the most famous paintings that depicts war, and it's a really powerful piece of art. And so the people who organized this march asked an artist to come and help with the signs, and they made this rendition of Guernica so that it came apart, and then the marchers could then come together and it would make the whole painting, which was beautiful and everything. But however, it didn't relate to the campaign, to like what they were asking for in the march. It wasn't strategic. It was more like the whole campaign, the idea for the march and what they were asking for had been developed, and then they asked for some art to be kind of put on at the end. And we think of this as like the cake is baked and you kind of have art as an icing. And maybe you've encountered this. I know as an artist, I've been asked sometimes by people to like come and make a nice sign or a poster or something like that. And it can, you know, you can certainly make things look aesthetically better or sound better. But it also is different than having art and creativity baked into the whole process. And what we've seen as really effective and creative and truly innovative activism and advocacy is where the creativity is baked in. So we sometimes call this faux finish politics, where it's like the little bit of polish on the top is the artistic part. But what we really want to see is throughout, and not because it's bad to have the really nice signs. It's really great, but also we can do so much more, and we can be so much more effective if we bake it in. So
yeah, and I think going back to like the skills that you all have as composers, as performers, as musicians, as you know, and the training that it takes, the sort of approach, all those things that make you a good artist are what will make you a great artistic activist. That those things are needed in this world, and it's not well understood. Like if you go to an activist organization, and Elizabeth, I see you with the viola maybe, and said, "Hey, I play the viola. Can I help?" And they're like, "We don't really need viola." But instead of doing that, it's not the viola that's important. It's the way that you think, the way that we approach things as artists, the sort of understanding, even in the most simple things, like rehearsal. Rehearsal is important, right?
yeah, it's amazing how many activists do not rehearse.
Yeah, they like plan a whole event for months,
Yeah.
and they're really going to do this big march. We're going to do this. We're going to have it, and they don't rehearse. You know,
Yeah.
and if you look back at the civil rights movement, the sit-ins, they held rehearsals, literally.
Yeah.
Like the
civil rights movement was one of the most creative, like really effectively used creative activism in so many ways. And one of the things was rehearsals, right? And so with the sit-ins, they knew that they were going to confront people who were going to like throw things at them and yell at them. And so they went into theater settings and did these theater trainings of practicing to sit there. And it was amazing. They rehearsed a ton, and they were able to be like very skilled as they went out there. So
and to get the images that they needed to move the movement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so
Steve, I think we got a bit of time left.
Yeah.
And yeah, of course, we don't want this to be just one way thing. So if there are questions, yeah, please ask them, and Rebecca, Steve, or me will answer them.
yeah, if you dare unmute yourself, you're welcome to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they can unmute themselves.
No, I was thinking you were talking about me.
Oh, that you
No,
muted. No, we heard you. Yeah, and if you have a project or an issue that you're working on, we'd love to hear. Peter.
I think this is it's just so great to hear all of these different projects, which are kind of in a way so different from what we're trained to do as classical musicians. And a lot of classical musicians and composers come up through a very kind of narrow window of what you do and how you do it and how we behave and what's effective and what's not effective. And in some ways, the things that you're presenting are, Care Bears on the Mall are kind of distant from, playing concerts for kids.
Yeah.
But in a way, I think it's really good for all of us to totally stretch what's possible, and to kind of completely think outside of the box and ways of thinking about doing things. So I think it's just really great. I'm sure that everybody, I've gotten a bunch of feedback that people are really inspired by this and maybe a bit shy, but I hope that they will just let her rip with the questions, because there's a lot to chew on here, especially for us in this kind of very well-behaved industry.
Well, I was trained in fine arts and visual arts, right? And it's not as narrow. Like I know what you're talking about, but it's still confining. And I think that those kinds of definitions of who artists are and what they can do, and that activism is a separate thing, is really disempowering to us as artists. And you're basically being told you're like a machine that plays music, and we know there's a lot more to it, but but also that you're complete people, right? And like that those skills apply in other things, and that keeping art and activism as separate fields just makes both worse. And I think it takes a lot of money and effort to keep them apart because they naturally want to come together. That's why all of you are here. Like you want to know how to put this together.
Mm. Jade says, is there such a thing as being too small of an impact? I have things in mind that are about equity, but it seems almost non-essential considering other issues and topics.
I'll take the first stab at this.
Okay.
I would say yes. There are such things as being too small, but I wouldn't describe it as too small. I would say like, if you're like, what the question I hear you asking is like, could I be more ambitious? Could I do more? And if you're asking that, you probably could. And so to think about, this is a thing that if you're told like, well, you're just a musician, or like, you just do this, you don't do activism, like, then taking on a little bit, or doing it like, I'm just going to do this one little thing and that'll be my piece, that we're inheriting some of that control, you know?
Mm.
So what I would say is, imagine that it is too small. And what more would you do? Like, what do you want to do? What do you want to see happen? And then break that into smaller pieces, and then make small steps towards something much bigger and more ambitious.
Mm. Rocio has her hand up. Yeah. Rocio?
Hi, thank you
Hi.
so much for the talk today. I really enjoyed listening to you all and seeing your work. I have a couple questions. First one, I saw that Steve, you are a current professor at Purchase. I did that.
That's
There,
true.
my master's. I finished last year, and
Great.
I was wondering if you have an idea of how could I use institutions to expand, or not use, but maybe help me to amplify a program or an idea that I have, a project that I have.
KT, I wonder if I'm thinking of the Biennale that you just were part of.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure they asked you to do something and you probably pushed it, right?
Yeah. So basically, they just wanted to have Journal Rapé. So we sat down with them and, them like, look, we know that your audience is very different, but we also saying your audience is very open to different things, and that we would like to use this platform to use each episode and talk about a particular subject in Africa, whether the subjects are controversial or just, we all agree on it. And they were very open to it. And of course, if you look at the 10 episodes we did for them, people agreed on some stuff. Others they disagreed, and it was okay, But the main thing was for us being given the chance, and for them to hear a different speech. So I definitely think more and more, a lot of institutions are very aware that they need to have those kind of feedback, collaborate with artists that are coming a little bit off, so that they can have a representation that is much more realistic. So, yeah, and it's not only the Munich Biennale. We're working with a lot of institutions, and some of them, they come to us, others we go to them, and we just come and present our ideas, convince them of the importance of having us in their institution, collaborate with them. And if it's well explained and they can see what they're gaining from it, usually they help you make it happen.
Yeah, one thing that we also did with Free the Vaccine is we would do a little detective work, like with universities, because we were trying to get universities to make the research open source around COVID stuff. And so we would look at both like the institutional web pages when they would state their values, but also even the leaders like the president or deans, and look at their Twitter feeds and other places where they talked about what they loved and like really what their values were. And then we would approach them and say, hey, you said this thing. I've got something that will help you with what you care about, you know? And so it really, again, it's like very audience centric of like approaching them where they're at and saying, I'm going to help you do something that you want. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question that I have is that I have this the project that I currently have and that I have is I'm commissioning pieces right from composers that, and the thematic, the first one and the one that begin this project was with Anne LeBaron, and she's writing a piece called Feminicide, and talks about the feminicide that has been happening from Canada in the Highway 69 in the United States with the police brutality towards Black women, and in Mexico in Ciudad Juárez. That's the country where I grew up, and it's that issue is something that I, since a young age, I have been faced of insecurity and being to look for myself, and that there was a point when I just couldn't accept it anymore, and I had to do something.
Yeah.
So, I have been thinking of joining, or I would like to help. Yeah, help. There's a couple of nonprofits that in New York, I live in New York City currently, and that supports women's rights. But I was wondering how could I approach and like to, because I want to, I have been considering like there's these things for like women who come from Africa that have to come for an asylum, and I was thinking of doing concerts or presentations. I mean, I grew up in Mexico, so Latin American music, the rhythmics are really, I have an extensive repertoire that I was thinking I could present in a concert, but I wasn't sure
how to present it to the nonprofits. I think that they would love to hear from you. I think that it's such a beautiful idea also of like, it sounds like you're kind of offering this gift of to the women who are seeking asylum, maybe to experience this music, right? And like even to go in with something, you could start really small of just like, you know, could I come? First of all, ask to meet with them, because I think if they talk to you, you know, they would love to hear, and they would love to hear the music, of course. But also to just like start small and say, what if I, you know, we produce this music in a small event or one small thing, but then I think from there you could build, you know, it really is sometimes about just doing some small, we call it like prototyping your idea and starting small, and then you kind of have the evidence that you can build from there. But my feeling is that those nonprofits would really love to hear from you.
I would say too, you know, start with that offering of like, hey, I'm willing to do this. I'd like to volunteer. And then once you're there, think of it like a research trip. You know, like you're performing, but it's also a research trip. And you're like, how does this place work? What's going on? And look for little opportunities where, I try, when we do this kind of thing, I try to be like as unfiltered as I can. So if they say, well, then this happens, I'll be like, well, why would you do that? And like, just let them answer. Because sometimes the perspective that you have as a creative person, you're going to see something that they don't see because it's just always been that way. And then there might be something where you say like, hey, what if I started doing like these small music lessons with these people? Or what if we started making songs about their story of how they got here? Or, you know, like you would, instead of having a really I'm just going to come and perform, but like keep your ideas really open about what the result might take, you know, what form the result might take.
Yes, yes, I have been considering that that one, the last like making some and collaboratively. I have been thinking that specifically in Mexico, there's this program is like donate 1 hour, and you can, and it's to promote like cultural teaching in jails, no, prisons,
Oh yeah,
female prisons.
Yeah.
There's a organization in the US called Jails Guitar Doors. Do you guys know about that one? And they teach, it's pretty cool. They'll go in, they give guitars to, I give them money. It's like one of my favorite organizations. But they go in, they give guitars to inmates, and then they teach, and then they write their own songs, and then they have like performances. I'll put the link in the chat when I find it.
But Rocio, it sounds really amazing what you're thinking about doing, and I really do think that it's a wonderful opportunity for a different organization. So I would say, like, go for it. Start asking around and talking to people. Yeah, let us know what happens. I really want to find out, because I think it's going to be really successful what you're working on.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all your advices. I really appreciate it and took notes. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
And feel free. And Peter, we were going to say, like, you know, if anyone here wants to reach out to us, if you have follow-up questions, we really love to help and give feedback and ideas. So we can, you can ask Peter, and we can give you our contact information.
Thanks so much. That's such a great offer, and I think you'll get some people being in touch with you, because I think there's the discussion that you started and the thinking that you started, I think, is really going to marinate for a little while, and some amazing things are going to come out of it. So I'm so grateful to all three of you for joining us, and for everybody for tuning in, and hopefully this is just the start of lots of great projects to come. And thank you so much.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for
having
having
us.
us. Yeah. Take
Good
care.
We'll see you later.
Okay. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.